Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I'm unemployed, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at ink now, shall we? Today's pen is the Pilot 78G in double broad. If I could get that to focus, that would be fantastic. There we go. And the ink is a proprietary Pilot ink, part of their Mixable series. This one is purple. And tried it on 6 different types of paper. The first one being Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. It did fairly well. There was actually very impressive dry time, and I think that's in part because this nib, although it is a double broad, the broads on these pens, both single and double, are actually stubs, and stubs tend to write a bit dry, and I found that both this ink and this ink in this pen tended to write a bit on the dry side. So this was actually a very good combination. It's a deep, rich purple. It's not really a violet, and it's almost more of an eggplanty, except it's a bit lighter. The water test was actually somewhat impressive, considering that this is such a hydrophobic paper and doesn't like to absorb things. There was not a great deal of shading, however it did seem to bring out a very rich purple color. The next paper is Rhodia, which is 80 grams per square meter. This is a dot pad. This did not bring out much shading either. However, it did have quite an interesting water test, and it dried again extremely quickly, very impressive. It allowed the ink to be absorbed into the paper, and when water was added, it just caused it to expand. So it's definitely still readable. However, if you have very tiny handwriting and you spill a glass of water on this, you might just end up with blobs. Next is Tomoe River paper, which I think brings out the best potential for shading. Again, the water test was not great, but it's actually better than most of the water tests I've done on Tomoe River paper, and even just for this mixable kind of ink. You get a bit of shading here at the top of like the C, and a little bit darker in the K, but not much. It's subtle. It's probably not going to show up on camera. This, because it's Tomoe River paper, it did take a while to dry. However, it was pretty impressive considering, again, it's Tomoe River paper. Next is just your standard copier paper. This, although it did allow the ink to be absorbed, it didn't stick around very much. It actually started to come apart a little bit. Here I felt like it actually lightened up the purple of the ink just a little bit. And because of that, actually managed to bring out a bit of shading, which you might be able to see just a little bit in that swirl. But yeah, so that's just your basic copier paper. Up next is Mead notebook paper, which had some spread, but no feathering. Bleed through was actually not so bad considering how cheap this paper is. Show through, when combined with the minimal bleed through, however, rendered it pretty unusable on the other side. No shading, well, not much complimentary when it comes to this paper. The water test was a mess. I'm just going to leave it at that. Up next is Moleskine paper, where there was a little bit of feathering here and there. There was a bit of spread. The water test was, honestly, I don't have a word for that. But also, it took a while to dry. It took longer for it to dry on this paper than it did for it to dry on some of the more dense papers. I mean, it dried in 6 seconds on the extremely dense Clairefontaine, and it dried in 2 seconds on Rodia, but here it took 4, which I was quite surprised by. Bleed through was pretty bad. It was lots of small dots. Show through was also pretty terrible. You can actually read the water test on the other side, which I found both sad and amusing. And lastly, I did a chromatography, which I learned from Michael Madsen. You should check out his stuff on YouTube. I actually put the dot way down here and it got pushed all the way up. And you'd think that this would have some great potential for shading, just judging by this chromatography, because there's this wonderful deep rich purple at the top, but then there's this, you know, pinkishness down here, which is sort of what remains if you get anything to remain after a water test. And so I actually like this purple. I don't have a lot of purples. When I do, I tend to go for more of the dark grayish purples. This one I found to be pretty nice. In combination with this pen, it worked extremely well. It may remain in this pen for a while because they actually work really well together, especially on cheap paper. So if I'm ever taking notes, you know, out in the real world where they generally don't have nicer, more fountain pen friendly paper, this may be my go-to pen. And so in those situations, in these kind of dry writing pens, I highly recommend it. So for your consideration from the Triple N Network, have a good day.